There is a particular kind of fear that professionals do not talk about easily. Not the jump scare kind, not the noise in the dark that turns out to be a pipe settling. The kind that comes over a person who has spent 15 years walking through derelict psychiatric wards, flooded Victorian asylums, and wartime bunkers with nothing but a camera and a measured detachment. And suddenly, in the middle of a completely ordinary investigation, puts down their equipment, picks up their coat, and walks to the exit without fully being able to explain why. That is the thread running through this list. Every house here has been investigated by people who do this for a living. People who have stood alone in medieval dungeons at 3 in the morning and professionally assessed hundreds of supposedly cursed buildings across England. And every single one on this list has, at some point, sent at least one of them home early. 10 houses. Some of them you have heard of. Some are sitting quietly in English counties right now, looking perfectly ordinary from outside. Number 1 involves a detail so specific and so difficult to explain away that serious researchers have never left it alone since 1953. Stay until number 1. It is worth it. Number 10. Woodchester Mansion, Gloucestershire. There is a building hidden in a steep wooded valley in the Cotswolds that nobody has ever finished. Not abandoned mid-renovation. Construction stopped in 1873 while the walls were still being cut. When William Lee, a wealthy Victorian convert to Roman Catholicism who had spent the equivalent of roughly £20 million beginning his dream Gothic revival estate, died that year, the stonemasons put down their chisels and never returned. His son was told the same thing every architect since has concluded. Completing Woodchester Mansion would cost more than starting over. So they left it. 150 years later, you can walk through rooms where staircases end mid-air, gargoyles are half-carved, and bathtubs hang from exposed rafters, awaiting floors that were never laid. One fireplace stands in complete isolation, no room around it, no chimney above, just a fireplace, waiting. 2 colonies of rare lesser horseshoe bats have lived here since at least 1959, studied continuously in what is now Europe's longest uninterrupted bat study. Certain rooms are permanently sealed to protect them. The bats moved in. The builders never came back. Paranormal teams working official investigation nights here have produced reports with a particular consistency. Not equipment failures or shadows. Several separate teams, working independently, describe the same sensation in the same rooms. A feeling of being watched by something that has already decided whether you are welcome and has not told you the answer. One 2012 investigation ended when a team member's chair moved on camera in a room with no draft. They noted it in the report and moved on, which is a very specific kind of professional composure that tells you quite a lot. Number 9. Bury Pomeroy Castle, Devon. English Heritage. The organisation that maintains England's most significant historic sites has in its own official visitor materials described Bury Pomeroy as one of the most haunted castles in England. Not a ghost hunting blog. English Heritage. They said it anyway. The Pomeroy family held this land for over 400 years, granted by William the Conqueror. In 1547, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, brother of Henry V's Queen Jane Seymour, and at that moment, the most powerful non-royal in England, bought the estate. He was executed in 1552. His descendants attempted ambitious renovations that consumed everything they had. By 1613, the great house was unfinished and bankrupt. By 1697, it was deliberately demolished by the next owner. Timber stripped, lead melted from roofs, stone carted away. What remained was an elaborate, beautiful ruin. 2 legends predate the demolition by centuries. The White Lady is said to be Margaret Pomeroy, imprisoned in the dungeons by her own sister over a man they both wanted, and left there until she died. The Blue Lady is older and stranger. Sir Walter Farquhar, a physician who treated royalty in the late 1700s, formerly recorded encountering a woman in blue, who drew him toward a dangerous area of the ruin before vanishing. Several investigators working Bury Pomeroy after dark have described the same directional pull in the same areas, without prior knowledge of Farquhar's account. One unusual statistical note: researchers who have tracked sightings here over many years find that roughly 80% happen during daylight hours. Not at midnight, in the afternoon, in clear weather, to people who came for the architecture. Number 8. Blickling Hall, Norfolk. On the 19th of May, every year, something is said to arrive at Blickling Hall. A carriage. 4 headless horses. And in the carriage, a woman in white, holding her own severed head in her lap. Anne Boleyn was executed at the Tower of London on the 19th of May, 1536. Henry V had her charged with adultery and treason. The charges were almost certainly fabricated. She was executed anyway. Blickling Hall in Norfolk is believed by historians to be her birthplace, or at minimum, the primary Boleyn family home during her early years. The current Jacobean building was constructed between 1616 and 1627 on the exact same site. Every year, on the anniversary of her execution, sightings on the approach road have been reported, a tradition stretching back continuously to 1536 itself, when locals described 4 headless horses on the drive as news of the execution reached the estate. Whether that first account is genuine historical record or retrospective folklore is impossible to verify. What is documented is that the anniversary sightings continue today, and every May, the National Trust quietly acknowledges that local people gather at the gates, not quite sure what they are expecting, not quite willing to leave before midnight. A queen died 500 years ago for reasons that had nothing to do with justice. She has allegedly been returning to the same address on the same date ever since. At a certain point, the repetition itself becomes the thing worth noticing. Number 7. Ham House, Richmond. Ham House was built in 1610 and is today one of the best preserved 17th century interiors in the world. Every room feels as though the people who owned it simply stepped out and did not return. That impression is, according to multiple investigators, more accurate than it sounds. Elizabeth Maitland, Duchess of Lauderdale, effectively co-governed Scotland under Charles II through her husband John Maitland. Contemporary accounts describe her as calculating, relentless, and entirely unwilling to release anything she had decided was hers. She died at Ham House in 1698 at 71. She had spent decades making the house into a precise expression of her own will. She has not, by most accounts, left. Ham House is officially reported to harbour approximately 16 hauntings. The Duchess is described in sighting reports as present in specific rooms, a cold displacement in the air near her former bedchamber. Her dog, a small spaniel consistent with period portraits, has been heard and occasionally felt in the long gallery where no dogs are permitted. One guide described a visitor complaining that she could not bring her own dog inside, asking who the dog already in the gallery belonged to. There was no dog inside. Several investigation teams have noted in their reports that the house does not feel like it needs them there. Not disturbed, occupied. One team wrote that it felt like arriving somewhere without an invitation and finding everyone in the room already looking at the door. Number 6. Raynham Hall, Norfolk. In September 1936, 2 country life photographers were working at Raynham Hall when one of them suddenly grabbed the other's arm. There was something on the staircase. The flash fired. When the negative was developed, a translucent, descending veiled figure was on the stairs. Country Life published it in December 1936. Kodak examined the negative and confirmed it had not been double exposed. No agreed mechanical explanation has ever been produced. It remains the most examined ghost photograph in British history. The figure is believed to be Lady Dorothy Walpole, sister of Britain's first Prime Minister, Sir Robert Walpole. She married Charles Townshend, 2nd Viscount Townshend, a man whose temper was well documented in their social circle. According to accounts passed through generations, Charles discovered a prior relationship before the marriage and responded by confining Dorothy to rooms in Raynham Hall, separated from her children. Official records state she died in 1726, aged 39, of smallpox. The whispers that followed said something different. The first recorded sighting was at a Christmas party in 1835. A woman in an old-fashioned brown dress with hollow sockets where her eyes should have been. The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. The hall is still a private family home. The Townshend family lives there today, as they have for 3 centuries. They have never publicly endorsed the ghost story. They have never denied it either. Number 5. Highgate Cemetery, London. On the 6th of February 1970, a man named David Farrant wrote a letter to the local paper. He had glimpsed a grey figure through the iron gates of Highgate Cemetery on Christmas Eve, and asked if anyone else had seen anything similar. Within 2 weeks, enough letters had arrived describing ghosts, a spectral cyclist, a pale gliding form, and ringing bells to fill most of a page. A man named Sean Manchester read them and contacted the press. He said the figure was a vampire, a king vampire, an entity imported from Eastern Europe in the 18th century, now active in the cemetery. ITV broadcast interviews with both men on the evening of the 13th of March 1970. Within 2 hours, a mob had swarmed over the gates and walls of Highgate Cemetery, despite police attempts to stop them. They were looking for the vampire. On the 1st of August that year, the charred and headless remains of a woman's body were found near the catacombs. David Farrant was arrested in the churchyard that summer, carrying a crucifix and a wooden stake. He was later convicted in 1974 for damaging memorials and interfering with human remains inside the cemetery. Folklore scholar Bill Ellis, writing in the academic journal Folklore, noted that the Hammer horror film Dracula AD 1972, starring Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, was directly inspired by the Highgate case. The East Cemetery is open to the public today. The Gothic West Cemetery requires a guided tour. Ghost walks run on weekend evenings. The guides mention the 1970 events matter-of-factly, and then move on, as professionals do. Number 4. Borley Rectory, Essex. Borley Rectory no longer exists. It burned on the 27th of February, 1939, when the new owner knocked over an oil lamp while unpacking. The insurance company concluded the fire appeared to have been started deliberately. The ruins were demolished in 1944. Before all of that, it was the most famous haunted house in England. The rectory was built in 1862 for Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Bull and his family of 14 children. Reports of unexplained footsteps and ringing bells began almost immediately. In 1900, 4 of Bull's daughters saw a nun-like figure in the garden at twilight. The background legend, a medieval nun bricked alive into a convent wall, was investigated in 1938 and found to have no historical basis. Researchers traced it to a Walter Scott poem. Psychical researcher Harry Price arrived in 1929, recruited 48 volunteer observers, published 2 books, and turned Borley into an international sensation. After his death, a reporter accused him of staging phenomena, with pockets full of stones, during an alleged spirit-throwing incident. The Society for Psychical Research concluded Price had manufactured significant evidence. Marianne Foister, wife of the last rector, later admitted she had fabricated paranormal activity to conceal an affair, and that several of the wall writings, including "Marianne, please help me get out," seen by multiple witnesses, were produced by herself or others. And yet, a young woman's skull was found in a cupboard, wrapped in brown paper. Bones discovered in the cellar in 1943 were given a Christian burial after the local parish refused, believing they belonged to a pig. Several participants with no connection to Price described experiences they maintained until their deaths. The most thoroughly exposed haunted house in England. The one whose history still refuses to be fully contained by that exposure. The building is gone. The question remains. Number 3. Ancient Ram Inn, Wotton-under-Edge, Gloucestershire. The ancient Ram Inn was built in 1145. In 1968, a man named John Humphreys bought it for £2,600 and spent the rest of his life there. His wife left. His daughter left. He stayed alone until he died in December 2017. At 89 years old. The building sits on the crossroads of 2 ley lines, one running through Stonehenge, the other through Glastonbury Tor. It also sits on a 5,000-year-old pagan burial ground, confirmed when Humphreys excavated the basement floor and found the skeletons of children with broken knives still inside the remains. Experts who examined the site described the evidence as consistent with ritual sacrifice. Stuffed animals were placed around the basement in response to the sound of childlike crying reported throughout the building. The crying became less frequent. It did not stop. The bishop's room on the first floor carries 9 separate reported entities across independent investigations. A Roman centurion on horseback has appeared through the solid wall, witnessed separately by 2 plumbers working in the room who compared accounts afterward and found them identical. Ghost Adventures filmed here for Season 2. Zach Bagans, who had investigated hundreds of locations internationally by that point, described the bishop's room as among the most genuinely disturbing environments he had encountered professionally. Several teams who investigated once have not requested to return. The inn is not a conventional tourist attraction. People pay to spend the night, £25 to £30. Most accounts describe the experience as considerably more than they anticipated. John Humphreys spent nearly 50 years alone in this building and never once considered leaving. That is either extraordinary courage or evidence that whatever is in the ancient Ram Inn decided very early on that he was not a problem. Number 2. Chillingham Castle, Northumberland. Chillingham Castle is not primarily frightening because of what people have seen there. It is frightening because of what actually happened there. Historically documented, on the record, not disputed. The castle was built before 1246 and served as a strategic checkpoint on the English-Scottish border. In 1298, King Edward I used it as a base before marching north to fight William Wallace at the Battle of Falkirk. A man named John Sage was the castle's torturer during the Scottish-English Wars. Injured in combat and reassigned to the chambers, historical accounts associated with Chillingham estimate he tortured and executed over 1,000 people across 3 years, approximately 50 per week. His tools are on display in a room open to visitors. This is not the original torture chamber. The real chambers are sealed beneath the current restaurant. They were closed after a séance produced results the castle management has declined to fully describe. Human remains are documented inside them still. When the war ended, the English burned the remaining prisoners alive in the courtyard. Men, women, and older children. Younger children were taken to King Edward's room and killed. John Sage was subsequently hanged publicly. The gathered crowd cut off his fingers, toes, nose, lips, and genitals while he was still breathing. During renovation work on the Pink Room, the skeletal remains of a boy were found inside a wall. The condition of his hands, broken fingers, destroyed nails, showed he had been placed there alive. His spirit is now the most consistently reported apparition in the castle. Paranormal teams who investigate Chillingham note something they do not often encounter elsewhere. Not isolated incidents, but a sustained presence across the entire structure. Several have reported they would not enter the sealed original chambers under any circumstances. A few have not returned to the castle at all. The history is real. The deaths are documented. Chillingham keeps asking what they leave behind. Number 1. Treasurer's House, York. In 1953, an 18-year-old apprentice plumber named Harry Martindale was working alone in the cellar of the Treasurer's House in York. He had been at the top of his ladder for roughly 4 hours when he heard a sound, like a single trumpet note, repeated, growing louder, coming from inside the wall. Then a soldier stepped out of the wall directly below him, full Roman military dress, plumed helmet, round shield on the left arm, short sword on the right, green tunic, open sandals with leather straps to the knee. He was followed by a cart horse, and then by approximately 18 to 20 more soldiers marching in pairs. They crossed the cellar and vanished into the opposite wall, visible only from the knees upward, until they descended to the level of the floor, where their sandals became visible. Harry Martindale fell from his ladder and pressed himself into a corner until they had passed. When he ran upstairs, shaking severely, the curator of the house looked at him before he had spoken a word and said, "By the look of you, you've seen the Romans." There had been previous sightings. He was not the first. Here is the detail that researchers have never been able to leave alone. Roman legionaries traditionally carried rectangular shields, the ones known from every textbook illustration. Martindale described round shields. He described green tunics. He described a specific sandal design. Military historians initially noted these details did not match the standard Roman garrison profile for York. Later excavations of the city confirmed that the soldiers stationed in York during the 4th century, a later auxiliary unit, used round shields, wore green tunics, and were equipped exactly as Martindale had described. He had accurately depicted a specific historical military cohort that an 18-year-old plumber in 1953 had no academic reason to know anything about. The treasurer's house was built directly over a confirmed Roman road, one of the main routes out of Roman York. During restoration work in the 1890s, 4 Roman column bases were found in the cellar. One remains in place beneath the floor today. Harry Martindale told his story consistently for the rest of his life. He never accepted payment for interviews. He never changed a single detail across 60 years of telling it. He died in 2014. The National Trust acknowledges the sighting in their official visitor materials. Several paranormal investigators who have worked the cellar have reported hearing the same sound Martindale described, a single repeated trumpet note from inside the wall. A few submitted reports, noting they did not investigate further after hearing it. Not from fear exactly, they wrote, but because whatever was moving through that cellar was not something that required their documentation. It was simply doing what it had always done, in the place where it had always done it, 14 centuries before anyone living thought to call it a haunting. 10 houses. 10 different ways England holds on to what happened inside its walls. None of these stories are really about ghosts. They are about places where something so heavy occurred. A torture, a betrayal, a life walled in, 100 deaths in a courtyard, that the weight of it did not lift when the people did. The grief stayed. The violence stayed. A queen executed on a political whim still arrives on the same date every year, 488 years later, at the place she started. These buildings were not designed to be haunted. They were built to be homes, barracks, rectories, inns. Somewhere in the distance between what they were built for and what they became, something settled in that has not been persuaded to leave since. If you know a location in England with a story that belongs on this list, somewhere investigators have walked into and quietly walked back out of, drop it in the comments. If enough people name the same place, that becomes the next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you happen to visit any of these locations, do one thing. Pay attention to how the building feels when you first walk in. Before you read anything, before you look at anything, just notice whether it feels like somewhere that was expecting you. Some of them will make you wish it did not.